Mister, can we sleep here just tonight? Mommy won't wake up anymore, please. Seattle, Belltown District, December 23rd, 11:53 p.m. The blizzard had transformed the city into a predator, wind tearing through steel canyons, snow erasing streets into white oblivion beneath a sky that felt like iron. The penthouse lights of the district glowed faintly through the storm, unreachable as stars, and not a single security intercom had answered the two figures collapsing at the entrance of the most expensive building in the Pacific Northwest. The small voice shattered against the howling wind as little Lillian Anderson, 6 years old and shaking violently, used her frozen fists to pound again on the reinforced glass door of the Nam building. Her breath came in white gasps while her small body crouched over her unconscious mother sprawled across the snow-covered steps. Inside the penthouse, 23 floors above, Nam Jae-hyun stood at the floor-to-ceiling window watching the storm consume Seattle when the private elevator alert chimed. His head of security's voice crackled through the intercom. "Sir, front entrance, child. Woman down, she's not moving." Jae-hyun's jaw tightened. The building's lobby cameras never failed. He pulled up the feed on his phone, and the world stopped. The woman lying in the snow, green coat already half buried, blonde hair frozen against marble steps. Linda Anderson, the federal witness who destroyed his empire 8 years ago, the woman whose testimony had cost him 5 years in a federal prison, the ghost he'd imagined finding 1,000 times, but never like this, never dying, never with a child beside her whose yellow coat was so thin he could see her ribs shaking through the fabric. Jae-hyun's hand hovered over the intercom button. One word and his men would make them disappear. One word and the debt would be paid. Then the small voice looked up at the camera, blonde hair matted with ice, blue lips trembling, and knocked again. "Please, mister, Mommy promised we'd be safe if we found you." Jae-hyun closed his eyes. 8 years ago, in a federal courtroom, Linda Anderson had testified about wire transfers, shell companies, and routes he'd used to move money through Vancouver. She'd dismantled his network, named his associates, marked him for death inside prison walls. But buried in page 47 of her testimony transcript, between routing numbers and bank codes, she'd said 9 words his lawyer almost missed. Account Sierra Hotel November requires secondary verification before Asian transfers. SHN, his sister's initials. Asian transfers meant the Korean contacts who were supposed to extract her to safety. It wasn't evidence, it was a warning. The corrupt FBI agents running Linda had planned to murder her sister as leverage while he was locked away. Linda's coded message had given him 72 hours to move her to Tokyo before the hit team arrived. She'd saved his sister's life by risking her own testimony's credibility. And now she was dying on his doorstep with the daughter those same agents had once used as collateral. Jae-hyun pressed the intercom. "Bring them up, now." But what Jae-hyun didn't know was that Linda hadn't come to him for mercy. She'd come because the same FBI unit that forced her testimony was now hunting her to silence her permanently. And in exactly 47 minutes, 6 vehicles with federal plates would surround his building with one mission: eliminate every witness, including the Korean Mafia boss protecting them. What happens when a man who's killed for honor faces the choice between revenge and redemption? Stay with me, because the decision Jae-hyun makes in the next 60 seconds will determine whether this child survives the night or becomes another frozen body the storm buries by morning. Snow clawed at the windows that night, the kind of storm that erased the world beyond the porch light. Jae-hyun Kim had learned to live quietly in this remote corner of Montana, where the wind sang in empty valleys and no one asked questions. He'd built his cabin himself, plank by plank, after leaving behind a city full of ghosts and unspoken debts. Tonight, though, the wind wasn't what kept him awake. It was the unease that had settled in his bones all day, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Then came the knock. It was faint at first, almost drowned by the howling storm, but then it came again, harder, desperate. He froze, listening. No one came out here, not after dark, not in a blizzard. He pulled on his coat, the old flannel lined with wool, and opened the door. She was there, half buried in snow, a woman in a bright yellow coat, her hair matted with ice, her lips blue. She swayed on her feet before he caught her, the smell of cold and iron and something else, blood, hitting him all at once. "Help, please," she whispered. He dragged her inside, the door slamming against the wind. She collapsed by the fire, her gloved hands trembling as he pulled off her coat. A dark stain spread across her sweater, deep red against gray wool. "Hold on," he said, already reaching for his first aid kit. "You're going to be all right." But then she looked up at him, her eyes glassy but searching. Recognition flickered there, faint but unmistakable. "Jae-hun," she breathed. He froze. The name fell from her lips like a secret she wasn't supposed to remember. It had been years since anyone had said it that way, years since he'd been anything but Jay, the quiet mechanic who fixed snowmobiles and kept to himself. "Do I know you?" he asked, though his voice betrayed him. She gave a faint, broken smile. "You do. You saved me once." He stared at her, trying to fit her face to a memory. The light from the fire danced across her features, pale skin, a scar along her jaw, the faintest trace of red in her hair. And then, like a knife through fog, he remembered. Linda Anderson. The name came back with the weight of everything he'd tried to forget, the trial, the lies, the gunfire in the courthouse parking lot. She'd been a federal witness, his witness, the one who'd agreed to testify against men who'd built their lives on corruption and blood money. He'd thought she was dead. The government said she'd vanished before the trial began, and now she was here, dying on his floor. "Linda," he said, the word catching in his throat. Her eyes fluttered open again, wet with tears. "They found me, Jae-hun. I didn't know where else to go." He pressed a towel to her wound, but the blood seeped through, warm and insistent. He wasn't sure whether to ask how she'd found him or why. Maybe he didn't want to know. "Who?" he asked anyway. Her breathing hitched. "The same people you warned me about." She coughed, crimson bubbling on her lips. "I tried to disappear. New name, new life, but it never ends, does it?" The storm outside roared, shaking the cabin walls. Somewhere far off, a branch snapped like a gunshot. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the years of running, the fear carved into her face. He remembered the last time he'd seen her, under the glare of interrogation lights, both of them pretending they weren't afraid. "Linda," he said again, softer this time. "Stay with me." Her eyes met his. "You were right not to trust them," she whispered. "The files, they never destroyed them. It's all still out there. You have to—" But the sentence never finished. Her head fell to the side, her body slackening under his hands. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind screaming against the cabin walls. Jae-hun sat there, his fingers slick with her blood, the fire throwing restless shadows across the floor. He'd buried his old life deep, or so he thought, but now it had come crawling back in a yellow coat through a mountain blizzard. He closed her eyes, the fire crackling softly beside them. Outside, the storm raged on, relentless and blinding, as if trying to erase what had just happened. When he finally stood, his knees ached, his breath heavy. He looked at the blood on his hands, at the lifeless woman who once held the key to everything he'd run from. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a question rose, quiet, cold, impossible to ignore. If they'd found her, how long before they'd find him? He walked to the window and peered into the storm. Beyond the blur of snow, he thought he saw movement. Headlights? Or maybe just his own reflection in the glass. He reached for the lamp, turned it off, and stood in darkness. The wind howled, the mountains groaned, and Jae-hun Kim knew, with the certainty of a man who's run out of places to hide, this storm was only the beginning. Jae-hun stood in the middle of the dimly lit hallway, the rain outside drumming steadily against the windows. The storm had followed them in, carried by the two soaked figures now standing in his marble foyer, Linda and her quiet companion. His men had already spread out, forming a protective half-circle around them. The silence was heavy, a tension you could almost taste. One of his security chiefs leaned close to Jae-hun's ear. "It's her," he whispered. "Linda Carson, former bureau liaison. We have records. She was part of the investigation into your Seoul operation." His voice dropped lower, almost conspiratorial. "The safe call is elimination, now." Jae-hun didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed fixed on Linda. She looked thinner than he remembered from the dossiers, though her posture was steady, proud. Her hair, streaked with silver, clung to her temples. She wasn't afraid, at least not visibly, but there was something in her gaze, exhaustion maybe, or the quiet defiance of someone who'd run out of good options. "Mr. Han," she said, her tone measured but firm, "I have every reason not to trust me, but if you do what your men suggest, you'll lose more than you think." That made him pause. Her voice, her phrasing, something about it stirred a memory he hadn't thought about in years. His sister, Eun-ji, sitting on the porch of their old family home, sunlight dancing across her face. The day before the raid that had gone wrong, the last day he'd seen her before she disappeared into the Bureau's custody. He remembered the scrambled message he'd received weeks later, the coded note hidden in a supposedly routine testimony transcript. It was from someone inside, someone who'd risked everything to warn him. The message was brief, but it saved Eun-ji's life. And now, hearing Linda speak, the cadence of her voice, the rhythm of her words, it hit him like a punch to the chest. He looked over at his head of security. "Lower your weapons." The men hesitated. "Sir." "Do it," Jae-hun snapped, the authority in his voice cutting through the room. The muzzles dipped, though the men didn't relax entirely. Linda's companion exhaled quietly, tension bleeding from his shoulders. Jae-hun turned and walked deeper into the house. "Follow me," he said over his shoulder. "We'll talk inside." They entered his study, a room lined with old books, family portraits, and the faint smell of sandalwood. He gestured for them to sit. Linda remained standing. "I need to understand something," Jae-hun said finally, breaking the silence. "Why would the woman who helped bring down my operation walk into my house now?" Linda studied him for a long moment before answering. "Because the same people who used me to target you are coming for both of us, and because I owe your sister my life." The mention of Eun-ji's name sent a jolt through him. He hadn't heard it spoken aloud in years, not from anyone outside his family. "You know where she is?" he asked. "I know she's alive," she said softly, "and I know she wouldn't be if I hadn't passed her that warning. You recognized the words, didn't you?" He nodded slowly. The coded phrase was simple, something only a Korean speaker with deep roots in the culture would understand. It had been his mother's proverb, "Even the longest night ends with dawn." He hadn't realized until now that Linda had been the one who'd sent it. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, sliding one across the desk toward her. "You could have come sooner," he said. She gave a faint smile. "You wouldn't have listened." He couldn't argue with that. The years had hardened him, years of rebuilding, hiding, collecting debts and favors until he had power again, power built on silence and fear. Yet here stood the one person who had slipped through that world's cracks and found her way back. "What do you want from me?" he asked finally. "Protection," she said simply, "a chance to tell you what's really coming." The security chief knocked once, stepped in without waiting. "Sir, we have surveillance chatter from the docks. Someone's moving against your accounts. You might want to see this." Jae-hun glanced at Linda, then back to his man. "Handle it. No one moves until I say." The man hesitated again, clearly unsettled by his boss's unusual restraint. Understood. When the door closed, Jae-hun leaned back, staring at Linda in the soft amber light. "If you're lying," he said, "there's no one who can save you." "I'm not," she replied, "and you already know that." The rain outside had slowed to a drizzle. The thunder rolled farther away, leaving behind only the faint hiss of tires on wet pavement. In the quiet that followed, the two of them sat, enemies by circumstance, bound by an old, hidden debt neither had chosen. Finally, Jae-hun raised his glass in a slow, deliberate motion. "To debts," he said. Linda's lips curved slightly. "To repayment." They drank, and for the first time in years, Jae-hun felt the weight of the past begin to shift. Not vanish, but tilt just enough to let in the possibility of something he hadn't believed in for a long time: redemption. The flash of lightning revealed the ruin of the penthouse, overturned furniture, broken glass, the metallic reflection of the pistol near Kozlov's foot. Jae-hun's eyes flicked to it, but Kozlov saw the movement and smirked. "You won't shoot me," he said. "You're still one of the good ones." Lillian's mother, trembling, whispered something under her breath. Lillian could barely hear it over the rain hammering against the windows, but it was a prayer, one she hadn't heard since childhood. Kozlov's gaze softened for the briefest moment, as if the sound reached some corner of him he thought long dead. Then Jae-hun stepped forward. "This ends tonight." Kozlov tilted his head, his voice suddenly quiet. "You don't even know what you're ending. Do you have any idea how many of them there were? How many we made disappear so men like you could pretend the world is still clean?" The words cut through the air like glass. Lillian felt the room tilt, her stomach twist. She wanted to run, to drag her mother out, but she couldn't look away. Kozlov straightened, blood dripping from his sleeve onto the marble floor. 237, he said, almost tenderly. That's how many names were erased. People who saw too much. People like her. He nodded at Lillian's mother. Like you. Jae-hun lunged before Kozlov could move for the gun. The two men collided with a sound that echoed through the high ceiling. The struggle was desperate, wordless, a flurry of fists and broken glass, of breath and fury and survival. Kozlov managed to shove Jae-hun back, but the years of command had worn him down. The younger man struck again, sending Kozlov sprawling near the shattered window. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The city lights flickered below, 1,000 feet down. Kozlov slumped against the glass, the storm washing streaks of blood from his face. He looked at Jae-hun and then at Lillian, a strange peace crossing his expression. "You think you've saved her," he said, softly. "But the architects, there's always another. The design never dies." The window cracked beneath his weight. A sound, sharp, clean, and then he was gone, swallowed by the night. Lillian's mother sank to her knees, sobbing, the kind of cry that came from years of being afraid. Jae-hun dropped beside her, his hands shaking, not from the fight, but from the sudden hollow quiet that followed it. He didn't look at the broken glass or the open air where Kozlov had vanished. He only looked at Lillian. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The storm eased, leaving only the hiss of the wind. Lillian moved closer, placing a trembling hand on Jae-hun's shoulder. "Is it over?" she asked. He didn't answer. His gaze drifted to the city below, where sirens were already starting to wail, distant but rising. Somewhere out there, another architect was waiting, another plan already in motion. He knew that now. Kozlov's confession wasn't just a death rattle, it was a warning. Jae-hun exhaled, long and heavy. "It's over for tonight," he said finally. Lillian helped her mother to her feet, and the three of them stood together in the broken light, surrounded by the wreckage of everything Kozlov had built. The rain had stopped, but the air still hummed with what had been lost and what was still to come. The night pressed down heavy and wet as Linda and Jae-hun moved through the narrow service tunnel beneath the old city. The air was thick with mildew and iron, each step echoing against the damp concrete walls. Jae-hun's flashlight trembled in his hand, a thin beam slicing through the dark, revealing only fragments of their path: a rusted pipe, a scattering of rat droppings, the shimmer of puddles that smelled faintly of gasoline. Behind them, the city slept, oblivious to two ghosts shedding their names. Linda clutched the small duffel bag tight against her chest. Everything that still tied her to her former life fit inside: passports, photographs, letters, things that once meant safety but now could only betray her. She could feel her heart pounding beneath her ribs, not from fear alone, but from a strange mix of grief and resolve. She had always thought erasure would feel like loss. Instead, it felt like air returning to her lungs after too long underwater. Jae-hun walked a few paces ahead, quiet and deliberate. He had arranged this escape meticulously: contacts, routes, a signal that would tell Mrs. Choi they were coming. Linda trusted him in the way one trusts someone who has seen too much to make promises lightly. He had not spoken much since they left the apartment. Words, it seemed, were a luxury neither could afford until they were safely out. The tunnel ended at a rusted door marked with a fading red cross. Jae-hun knocked 3 times, paused, then 2 more. The door opened just enough for a sliver of light to escape, revealing a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and silver hair pulled into a knot. Mrs. Choi's expression was unreadable, her face lined not by age, but by the habit of watching everything without being seen. "You're late," she said simply, stepping aside to let them in. Inside, the air was warmer, smelling faintly of ink, glue, and something metallic. The small basement was cluttered but organized: a long table with papers, stamps, and blank ID cards laid out with surgical precision. A kettle hissed softly on a hot plate, steam clouding the small window near the ceiling. Mrs. Choi studied Linda for a moment. "So this is the one who needs to disappear," she said, not unkindly. "Sit, we don't have much time." Linda obeyed, lowering herself into a creaking chair. Mrs. Choi began sorting through papers with a calm efficiency that made her feel simultaneously safe and exposed. Jae-hun stood near the door, scanning the small room as if memorizing every exit. "You'll need new names, of course," she continued, glancing between them. "Something simple, believable, nothing that ties you to what you were." Jae-hun nodded towards Linda. "She'll be Linda Nam, her daughter Lillian Nam." Linda blinked, surprised. "Lillian?" she whispered. He met her eyes. "After your mother," he said quietly. "It fits." Mrs. Choi didn't pause to ask questions. She began typing on an old keyboard, the clatter loud in the stillness. A printer whirred to life, spitting out crisp new documents: birth certificates, passports, visas stamped with places Linda had never been. With each sheet that emerged, her old self seemed to fade a little more. When Mrs. Choi handed her the new passport, Linda hesitated before touching it. Her name, Linda Nam, looked foreign, yet strangely comforting. She traced the letters with her thumb, the paper still warm. It felt less like a disguise and more like a rebirth. Mrs. Choi poured 3 cups of tea and gestured towards a small metal bin in the corner. "Now you'll burn what's left," she said matter-of-factly. Linda opened her duffel slowly. Inside were fragments of her life: a driver's license, an old photograph of her and her father by the lake, her university ID, the passport that had once carried her across oceans. One by one, she dropped them into the fire. The edges curled, blackened, and turned to ash. The photograph was the last to go. She watched as the image of her younger self disappeared beneath the flame, the face smiling as even as it vanished. The heat licked her fingers, and she pulled back, trembling slightly. The room was silent except for the crackling of paper and the soft hum of the heater. Mrs. Choi didn't look away. She had seen countless people do this before, and each time she gave them the same small nod of respect, as if acknowledging the weight of what they were leaving behind. When it was done, Mrs. Choi closed the bin and set the lid on top. "You're clean now," she said. "From this moment on, you don't look back. The world only knows Linda Nam and her daughter. The rest is smoke." Linda felt the words settle deep inside her, heavier than she expected. Jaehyun placed a hand gently on her shoulder, a quiet reassurance. The past was gone, but something new, fragile, uncertain, alive, was taking its place. Outside, the night was beginning to lift. The first traces of dawn filtered through the cracks of the old building, soft and gray. As they prepared to leave, Linda took one last look at the furnace. The ashes inside were still glowing faintly, like embers of a story that had finally found its ending. When they stepped into the cold morning air, she no longer felt invisible. She felt unburdened, as if she had walked out of her own grave and into the uncertain grace of the living. She was Linda Nam now, and there was no going back. The wind off the Busan coast carried the scent of salt and distant wood smoke, soft and sharp all at once. The villa sat high above the waterline, white walls glowing against the pale winter sun. Waves rolled in slow motion below, their edges tinged with frost. It was late afternoon when Jaehyun, Lillian, and Min arrived, 3 months after everything that had nearly broken them. The air felt different here, softer, forgiving. You could hear laughter echoing from the neighboring houses, children playing, a dog barking somewhere beyond the dunes. It was the kind of sound that used to sting, reminding them of what they didn't have, but now it just settled quietly in their chests, like warmth returning to cold fingers. Jaehyun's sister, Soo-jin, was waiting at the door. She had flour on her apron and a smile that didn't waver when she saw them, though her eyes shimmered with emotion. Come in," she said, ushering them inside. "You'll catch a cold standing out there." Inside, the villa smelled of seaweed soup and ginger tea. The walls were lined with photographs of summers past, barefoot cousins, fireworks, beach picnics, faces glowing under sun and time. Soo-jin took Lillian's coat, brushed snow from her hair, and said something in Korean that made the girl laugh, though she didn't yet understand all the words. It didn't matter. Warmth doesn't always need translation. For weeks, Jaehyun had been quieter than usual, as if he were carrying a secret too tender to speak. Even now, as the evening light melted into gold, he fidgeted by the window, watching Lillian trace her finger along the steamed glass. Her reflection smiled back at him, a little taller, a little stronger than before. She had learned to sleep without waking from nightmares, learned to trust that the sound of waves meant peace, not warning. "Lillian," he said softly. She turned, curious. He walked toward her, holding something behind his back. His sister, sensing the moment, retreated to the kitchen. Only the sea stayed to listen. Jaehyun knelt on one knee, and in his hands was a coat, bright yellow, the color of marigolds in sunlight, lined thick with fleece. "It's new," he said, "warm, perfect for winters by the sea." He looked up at her then, his eyes steady. "May I be your father?" For a second, the world went completely still. The waves hushed. Even the clock seemed to hold its breath. Lillian blinked once, twice, and then her lips curved into a smile that trembled at the edges. "Yes," she said, the word so small it could have vanished in the wind, but it didn't. It grew, stretching between them like light breaking through clouds. "Yes, you may." He exhaled, something deep and long leaving him, something he'd been holding since the first time he saw her standing alone in that gray hallway months ago. He stood, wrapping the yellow coat around her shoulders. She pressed her face into the collar and whispered, "It's so warm." Outside, night had fallen softly. The first fireworks cracked open over the ocean, scattering color across the dark water, silver, gold, and violet. Soo-jin came to the doorway with mugs of hot chocolate, her eyes glinting with tears she didn't bother to hide. They stepped out to the terrace together, the three of them, Jaehyun's arm around Lillian, Min leaning against his shoulder. The fireworks mirrored in the glassy sea below, bursts of light dissolving into mist. Somewhere behind them, music drifted from a neighboring house, an old pop song from the 90s, the kind that makes you remember things you didn't know you'd forgotten. Lillian tilted her face up to the sky. Her cheeks glowed red from the cold, but her smile didn't fade. "It doesn't feel like winter here," she said. Jaehoon looked at her, then at the horizon where the fireworks met the waves. "No," he said, "winter can't reach us here." And for the first time in a long while, it was true. The ocean kept its rhythm, the house its warmth, and the night its quiet promise. They didn't need to speak anymore. Everything that mattered was already said in the way Lillian leaned closer, in the way Jaehoon rested his shoulder on hers, in the way Soo-jin watched them and smiled, knowing that this moment was what healing looked like. The fireworks bloomed again, brighter this time, painting the snow in fleeting colors. The yellow coat shone under the light, a beacon against the cold. At last, Lillian reached for Jaehoon's hand and held it tight. Together, they stood in the doorway of the house where winter could not reach, the ocean humming below them, and the world, at least for this one night, felt kind again. Thank you all for following this story. If you've enjoyed it, write in the comments where you're watching from. It means so much to know this story is reaching people around the world. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps me continue creating stories about connection, redemption, and the small moments that change everything. See you in the next video.